Hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and we're on episode 19 of Vinland Saga. And yeah, we only have 6 episodes left. I say we only have 6 episodes left of season 1, but we still have a lot of ground to cover. And as the last episode seems, Thorkell and Thorfinn's fight is done, right? Because he just literally threw Thorfinn into a tree. So I'm very curious how this episode is going to go, because Canute's had this big awakening, which I've got a couple comments, we'll talk about that. But he's had this awakening and he's decided that he's going to be kingly now. Gonna go and confront Thorkell. So I'm like, how is that going to work? How is Canute confronting Thorkell going to work? How is that going to play into Askeladd's plans of Askeladd taking Canute away? Because Canute was his bargaining chip to get on the council. How's that going to work? How is that going to work with Thorfinn being supposedly passed out, or at least having some broken bones from that fall with the trees? And where do we go to from here? So there's a lot of questions, like how is this going to go and lead into the rest of the season? So I'm very, very curious. The one thing I was thinking of today, when I was driving home from work, I was thinking about watching this episode tonight, and I was thinking about episode 18. And I was like, man, if Canute goes to face Thorkell, you know, in the OP, Thorfinn is looking and Canute and Askeladd disappear and he doesn't see them again. What if Askeladd decides that I'm going to take Canute and go, and he abandons Thorfinn? I was like, that would be awful, because Thorfinn went back and risked his life to save Askeladd. Now, granted, it was so that Thorfinn could kill him himself, but still, Thorfinn went back and saved his life, and his repayment would be just to leave Thorfinn in the snow and just peace out with Canute. It would be fitting of Askeladd's character, but I'm like, that would suck for Thorfinn. So I do have a couple comments. I have 2 comments before we start. One is from Alan Acevedo, and that's talking about how Askeladd decided to quit waiting on his mother's dream to come true. Like, he kind of confronted Canute because he was tired of waiting on his mom's dream to be fulfillment. He was a slave to his mother's dream of this king returning, and he realized that he was older and didn't have any time left, and so now's the time, and saw Canute and was like, he'll work. And so it spurred him on to take action and taking Canute under his wing. But in the same token, it's kind of interesting because it parallels Askeladd not waiting around anymore for his mother's dream to come true and deciding to take action, kind of in a way parallels Canute deciding to take action. Like, he's like, I'm tired of sitting around waiting on something to change. Nothing's changing, so I'm going to be the change and make stuff happen. So it's a really cool kind of parallel between those 2 characters, between Askeladd and Canute. So it's going to be interesting seeing how this new awakened Canute interacts with Askeladd. That's going to be interesting. And then, in a sense, Thor's ended up in a place where Canute is religiously, Alan noted. And I thought that was a really cool thing to bring up, is that, yeah, by the end of episode 18, Thor's had kind of abandoned all of the stuff about Valhalla and the warrior lifestyle and was like, no, it doesn't pan out. And he kind of followed his own way and tried to cultivate this peaceful existence with his family in Iceland. And that seems to be kind of like what Canute is. Canute kind of realizes the same things that Thor's did. And so I think that was really neat. And then Edgar noted how the mangaka requested that they wanted to make Canute in these episodes cuter. And I was like, oh, that's sweet. I like that. The mangaka's like, I can't make him cuter, so can you all? I think that they did a good job with that. I think they fulfilled the mangaka's request. But Edgar was noting that some people are divided on Canute's awakening. And after reading Edgar's comment on Patreon, I could totally agree with that, because, yeah, Canute kind of just wakes up in the moment and is like, yeah, I need to do stuff, and just immediately decides to do it. And I could see how some viewers might believe that it's sort of like a light switch flipping, and that there was no build-up or kind of exploration of Canute's character. He just wakes up from his dream, essentially, and decides to be a king. And so I could see why some people would not like that as character development, because there's not really any development. It just happens. However, I told Edgar in my reply, I was like, something that's kind of cool about that is that Canute and Thorfinn, it makes them polar opposites. Because Canute has this sudden realization about himself and his role and his place in the world. He has a sudden awakening, a realization, and acts on it. He's like, no, I'm going to change. I'm going to do what needs to be done, and does it. Whereas Thorfinn has had this revelation for the last 11 years on what he needs to do, that he needs to change, that he needs to give up revenge, that he needs to leave. But does he act on it? No, he keeps following revenge, and he keeps following Askeladd, Bjorn, and the other Vikings to chase down this vengeance, even though he knows it's getting him nowhere, and he knows it's not working, and he knows he's wasting his time. But he's too proud, and he can't let it go. And so I thought that was a really cool comparison and a contrast between Canute and Thorfinn. That one has the awakening, has the enlightenment, and says, yes, I'm going to change right now, become better, and do better. And the other one has the enlightenment, but realizes and thinks, nah, I'm going to go after the vengeance, and doesn't change. So I don't know. I think that'll be interesting as well moving forward if we get more with Canute and Thorfinn interacting with each other. But I don't know. At this point, I really honestly thought the battle with Thorkell and Thorfinn would last longer, like at least a couple more episodes. Like I figured we'd go back and forth between Bjorn and Canute and them, and like there'd be all this stuff built up. And no, episode 18 kind of turned all that on its head. So I'm curious now how we're going to resolve this and where we go to from here for the last several episodes. So maybe to set up, I guess, whatever's going to happen in season 2. I don't know. But in any case, we're going to find out. So I hope you all are ready. I've talked long enough. So we are going to watch Vinland Saga episode 19, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. This was a really good episode. And I'm honestly not sure if I need Whiteboard Coon out, but I was like, I'm going to bring Whiteboard Coon out just in case, because I had a few episodes ago where I just decided not to use Whiteboard Coon, and about 40 minutes in, I was like, I should have brought Whiteboard Coon out. So now I'm going to have Whiteboard Coon here just in case. But this episode was really good. It did not go how I thought it was going to go. I thought that Askeladd was going to try to run off with Canute or try to like run off with Thorfinn. I didn't think he was going to run off with Thorfinn if Canute showed up, but I figured like if Canute didn't immediately go to meet Askeladd and Thorkell, that he was going to try to get maybe Thorfinn away from there if he couldn't fight. Nope, everything went down pretty solid, and it all worked out surprisingly in Askeladd's favor, which is why when he laughed at the end, I was like, yeah, dude, you got to have your cake and eat it too, old man. Wow. But I'm glad this was not entirely a flashback. Like when we saw the flashback starting and he was going to tell Thorfinn about his parents and about his past, I thought we were going to spend the whole episode on it. But then when we cut back and didn't go back to the flashback, I was like, okay, cool. No, because there were some people talking in the comments. It might have been Killer Queen and some others talking in the comments about flashbacks, and some people like flashbacks, some people don't. I love flashbacks, especially like as a character development plot device. But I could understand why in the midst of this battle and with Canute, we didn't need to spend the entire episode flashing back to Thor's and Helga. But man, Thorkell's his great uncle. Interesting. Which kind of do some logistics, because he said he was 50 years old. So we'll do some logistics on that. I'm like, okay, that it could work out. I'm going to guess that Helga's brother is it's his niece. So Helga's his niece. So we need to do some family treeing up on this. All right. So let's go ahead and do that and find out what I've got here. So we have, we'll kind of go through. I'm going to put Thorkell right here. Thorkell right there. And then Sigvaldi right there. And they are brothers. They are brothers. And then Sigvaldi has Helga, who gets with Thor's. And they have Ylva, and they have Thorfinn. Which, Ylva now, she kind of makes sense. Her kind of like abrasiveness is kind of similar to her great uncle Thorkell. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting. But Thorkell was 50, right? He was 50 at the time. And so let's say that 15 years ago, because he's talking about, he said that was 15 years until after he heard he died. Okay. So, 15 years later, he heard he died. So, okay. But the timeline's a little wonky with that. We'll go back to that because I was trying to think. I was like, how does that match up with the timeline? Because right now, he says he's 50 and Thorfinn is 17, right? Which would make Ylva, she's how many years older than him? Like, was she 7? Was she almost 20? I feel like she was at the time when he was 10, she was like 15 or 16. So let's say she's 5 years older. So she's like 20, she's 22-ish. Okay, so then her mom at the time would be like 40s. So she's probably in her 40s. Okay. Right? Because if she was 40, she would have been 23 when she had Thor. Nah. I don't know. Either way, Helga, Sigvaldi must be much older than Thorkell. That's my point. We're going to forget the ages here, gaps here. In any case, Sigvaldi must be a bit older than Thorkell. Thorkell came on later in life, or they're half brothers. Regardless, Thorkell is like Sigvaldi's baby brother, and so him and Helga are probably not that far off. So even though he's her uncle, he's probably not that much older than her. And I think it's interesting that Sigvaldi wanted to make Thor's the leader of the JOMSVIKINGs, despite how powerful Thorkell is. But it kind of makes sense because Thor's is married to his sister, so there's like a family line there. Thorkell seems like Thorkell's a waifu. He's like the eternal bachelor until he met Asgeir. So, you know, I see that. You can see the writing on the wall there. Plus, Thorkell, he's pretty battle hungry and does not seem like... He's smart, and he kind of demonstrates this in this episode, but he doesn't seem like a diplomat. And maybe Sigvaldi saw Thor's as being similar to himself and maybe having a little bit more diplomacy ability than Thorkell, who just wants to fight. So interesting indeed. But this episode was great. So yeah, so I do want to make note, there's a little bit of a continuity maybe error in that when Thorfinn fell from the tree in the last episode, he like landed on his face into the snow, and here he's propped up against the tree. So maybe he like got himself up and out of the snow. I don't know. It seemed like a little bit of a continuity thing. But him like walking towards Thorkell. For a second, I thought that Thorfinn lost his memory. For a second, I thought Thorfinn was having amnesia. And I'm like, is the rest of the season going to be Thorfinn with amnesia? I was like, is that going to happen? Because that's going to be a weird thing. No, it's only for like 10 seconds. And then he turns back into a little feral beast. He turns back into a little Wolverine and like instantly gets on his guard again. That is the thing though. We talk about Thorfinn and Thorkell and Thors and Canute and Askeladd. So we've got like a little a pentagram, if you will. But we have Thorkell. We have Thorkell here. And we have Thorfinn. And we have Thors. And we have Askeladd, right? And then I'm going to put Canute over here. So we've got this little, make it like a parallelogram out of it. But so Thorfinn is basically a feral child. He is feral and he is unrefined. Unrefined and I'm going to put this down here, undisciplined. And here's the thing, he can't really help it. His father was taken from him when he was 10 years old. Or, I mean, he's 17 when he was like 6 years old. So when he was 6, that was even a lot younger than that. So when he was 6, he's been, since he was 6 years old, on his own with Askeladd and Bjorn and them, who have had no hand in raising him in any way, shape, or form. They just treated him like a little lost puppy, and he basically had to live off the scraps and raise himself. But without any proper guidance, should we expect Thorfinn to be any different? He's just been like a little mongrel that's been roaming around in the dump for the last 11 years and following the big dogs. So when Thorkell's like, you really don't know about all this stuff, it's like, no, he really doesn't. And to a lot of people in the comments have been talking about how Thorfinn is kind of like, I think Edgar brings up that it seems like his development is a little bit more shallow right now compared to all the other developments we've seen in this series. And I think that the fact that Thorfinn was raised in this environment contributes a lot to that, right? Because Thorfinn is not worldly. He's not like this open-minded intellectual. No, he's literally a little feral mutt that has been roaming around chasing Askeladd's tail the last 11 years and not getting anywhere, kind of spinning his wheels. Whereas Canute is knowledgeable. He is knowledgeable of his situation. At the very end of the episode, he's like, no. Ragnar told Askeladd, he's like, I know. He's like, I know that my father hates me. I know that my brother's in line for succession. I know that my father just wanted to send me out into battle to kill me off. because that was the politically correct thing to do. He couldn't just assassinate me. That would cause too much of a stir amongst all the supporters. So I'll just send him out in the battlefield. He'll die an innocent death, and then we'll just chalk it up to that and move on and let Harold take over. Yeah, he's like, no, he knows exactly what's up. Thorfinn has no clue what's up. Thorfinn is living life in the moment and chasing Askeladd down for revenge. He is very narrow visioned. He has a narrow scope of what is going on. And again, you kind of can't help it because Thorfinn's been molded this way by his environment. His setting has molded him into this way. And he can only live day to day seeking this one thing out. And it's very childish, but it makes sense because he's essentially been stuck in this 6-year-old growing up into a 17-year-old mentality without any kind of knowledge, discipline, guidance, anything. So how can we expect anything less from our poor feral child Thorfinn? But his expressions and Thorkell. So it makes sense now too why Thorkell is also kind of obsessed with Thorfinn. It's his great nephew. So he's like, your family, your blood. Of course I have interest in you. And you're like me, you're a warrior. So yeah. And then he's like, no, I can't fight you when you're like that. And he's like, what are you talking about? That line where it's limp. It's like snapped in half. Yeah, no. He's like, see, I was right. And that's when Askeladd, they're like, hey, old man, stop. And they call him old man, but I'm like, Thorkell's the same age as Askeladd. So it's like, you're not calling Thorkell. Thorkell is a buff 50-year-old. He is like on his game for being 50. I will say, back in the day, this is like 1000 AD. A lot of people didn't live past 70 back then, so he's doing pretty well for 50. I think he's on his game. Them biceps, he's kept that muscle tone really active for a man his age. And so he asked him to bring him a chair. I like that Thorkell understands what Askeladd is doing. So he understands and respects Askeladd. By the end of it, he wants to be BFFs. Wants to be friends. By the end of it, he's like, hey, you're a warrior. You're not a slouch. Let's be buddies. And Askeladd's like, I ain't got time for you. I also want to make note that Thorfinn's faces, his expressions in these episodes are so grisly. Like, you can tell he's in pain. Like, his face is drawn so he doesn't look like a 17-year-old. He looks like a 30-year-old man in that moment. And so, Askeladd, this is the most soft and compassionate this man has been towards Thorfinn this entire time. But he justifies why he's like that very soon. But him just being like, hey, let me see it. And he's like, go away, Baldy, treat your own wounds. He's just being obnoxious. And Askeladd's like, this is not the time for you to be stubborn. I'm trying to help you. He's like, let me see it. And Thorkell's like, well, don't get in. Thorkell's just sitting down with his weapons, watching this all unfold. And I like that it's Askeladd saying, don't get so mad. It's a bad habit of yours. Use your head. Askeladd saying that Thorfinn is just this little angry bean. And it's like, well, you've not helped him in any way not be that. And you can just tell that Thorfinn, he's so mad that he has to rely on Askeladd for help. So he's mad that he has to rely on Askeladd. The one guy he came to save so that he could kill him is now saving him so he can kill him. Thorfinn can't catch a break. And his eyes tremble and he just looks mad. And Askeladd's like, what do you think you should do right now to win? And Thorfinn, you could just see he's so in pain by this because he's like, the last thing I wanted to do was be helped by you. You're the one I'm trying to kill, and you're the one helping me. He probably feels pathetic, right? And he's like, and then Thorkell's like, I haven't had this much fun in a long time, Thorfinn. We're best old buddy, old pal. He's like, I'll tell you like you promised. And that gets Thorfinn's attention. He's like, what? He's like, about your father, Thor's. And then we cut to the intro. He's like, so again, Thorkell is a man of his word. So he is a man of dignity and his word. Just like, well, it's interesting. He's a man of dignity in his word. And Askeladd, I would say, is a man of principles. A little bit different, because I would say Askeladd's not entirely a man of his word, because he tweaks the script as we go, right? Askeladd's somebody that alters the plan as it unfolds. He doesn't necessarily keep to what he told you. He'll alter it as he sees fit. But he does have a specific set of principles and values that he sticks to, right? And so I think he's true to those. Whereas Thorkell, his idea of dignity and honor is very pragmatic and practical in what you think it is, right? Like if he says he's going to do something, he's going to do something. And so in any case, we go to this flashback about the JOMSVIKINGs. He's like, you know who they are. And he says, Thors and I were commanders. So we have that he and Thorkell were commanders. And it's funny because it's like Thors was just a guy that just rose up the ranks. He wasn't anyone special. He just rose up the ranks and got into this position, right? And I love that he looks so young. Thors was particularly strong. Like Thorkell looks, he doesn't look too much different as like a 50-year-old, but he doesn't look crazy different, but he does look particular. Okay, so I was thinking about the timeline. We'll get to it here in a second. I think I've figured out where my hiccup on the timeline was. But yeah, the JOMSVIKINGs don't accept average warriors. And we see him with a big sword. He was so good they nicknamed him the Troll. And so their leader, Sigvaldi, liked him and gave him one of his daughters. So Sigvaldi has other daughters. And we'll put them over here. We don't know who the other daughters are. We know Helga was one of them. And he says that he gave Thors one of his daughters. And so then she's your mother, Helga. And that's when, and so Thorfinn didn't know, like, Thors obviously didn't want to tell the village and all them about his heritage because it might get them curious and they might go looking for trouble or it might put them in danger. And so Thorfinn is like, my grandfather was the leader of the JOMSVIKINGs. He's like so surprised by that. And then Thorkell's like, yeah, he's also my older brother. He's like, so that makes me your great uncle. Surprise! We're blood! So way back at the beginning of this, when I was like, Thorkell has uncle vibes. I wonder if there were any black boxes on Discord or any of you in the comments that were like, well, kind of uncle vibes. How about great uncle vibes? I'm like, ugh. And they're like, he's related. And it's funny, when you cut back from Thorfinn's face to Thorkell's face, they have the same eyes. They have those brown eyes. And I thought for a while that they were like Thor's eyes. And Thor's has brown eyes too, but the shape of them, the same color of hair. Granted, half these Vikings are all blonde, so you wouldn't know. But they do share the fact that he is his great uncle. And Thorkell has uncle vibes. Makes sense. But yeah, they have the same color of hair. It's wild and crazy and unkempt. Both of them are. They have the same eyes. It's fascinating how similar they are. And he says, our last battle was the Battle of Hjörungavarg in Norway. And they lost that battle. And that's when Thor's disappeared. So we go back to the events of episode 1. And I feel bad that Thorkell cried for him. He cried over him. Like, he was genuinely sad that Thor's died because he wanted to beat him with his own hands. That's so sad. It's like, oh. But he says Thor's wasn't dead. And he found out 3 months later in 987. So 3 months after his funeral. And that's when we see him come back. Now, the question is, what did he come back for? So did he come back to get Helga? I'm assuming, did he disappear for 3 months and heal his wounds or go on and figure out and make his way back to get Helga? Is that the case? Helga and Ylva, he just went back to get them and take them away? I'm assuming that's what happened. He came back to get Helga and Ylva and leave. Which would make sense because when the scene where he was about to leave to go into battle and she said, I want you to name your daughter, and that got him to form that connection with her, that makes sense that they were here in JOMSVIKING, and he had to go back to get them to leave to go to Iceland. Makes sense. But yeah, so Thorkell, we find out that while the last 3 months he's just been drinking and moping about because he's sad that Thors has died. And then he's like, he thinks that they're thieves. And he says, I usually leave thieves alone, but I'm in a bad mood. And Thors, he says, I lost one of my friends, so I'm in a bad mood. And it's like, it's the fact that he called Thors his friend and he was sad that he died. So Floki was back at that other battle as well. So that's curious that Floki was in that same battle with them. And so when he goes to attack him, I love that Thors grabs the axe with his hand. Oh, it's so good. And he doesn't use a weapon. He doesn't use a weapon to fight him. And then both him and Thorkell and him growing out facial hair, it's great. But his eyes, it's so curious. His eyes have like this clarity to them, right? His eyes have this clarity that Thorfinn's doesn't have. Thorfinn's eyes don't have that clarity to them, right? So his eyes have light and clarity. They're so rich looking, right? Kind of like Canute's post-awakening. Their eyes are the same. Okay, interesting. But yeah, he sees Thorkell, and that's what Thorkell's like, oh, it's you! And he's just like, what? I love it. He's like, what are you doing here? And I love that he gets so excited. He says, where have you been? And Thorkell looks young, but Thors looks so young. He looks so young. Like, it's kind of crazy to see them all when they're younger, and then you see them all like as adults later on, or even more grown up. And he's like, we held your funeral. Like, he's just telling him, he's like, you died. We had a funeral for you, dude. I've been drinking ever since. It's like, he's so happy to see him. And he hugs him and everything. And then Thor's like, calm down. Like, it's so sweet. Like, seeing Thorkell be so happy to see him. And he's like, sorry for making you worry. And you see Ylva. And Ylva has the wild and crazy hair like Thorkell. Oh, makes sense. I thought it was all Thor's, but no, it was Thorkell too. Dim genetics, right? Indeed. Although Helga's not very tall, and Sigvaldi didn't look very tall either, so Thorkell is just like a crazy exception. He's like, why are you dressed in shabby clothes? And she's like, Uncle Thorkell, excuse me. Like, Helga tries to butt in. And he's like, you'd never die over something as little as falling into the sea. And she tries to get his attention. And he's about to take them over to Sigvaldi to wake him up. And that's when Thor's like, no, you don't understand. We're leaving. We're not staying here. And it's crazy that Thors looks so larger than life. Like in the earlier episodes when Thorfinn is a kid, Thors looks like this big, strong, huge, larger than life man. But then when you see him standing next to Thorkell, he's not that tall. Like y'all said in the Discord, he was like 5'10". It's like he's not crazy tall. Thorkell's much taller. And he's like, what's wrong? And then he says that we're leaving. He's not going to go see the leader. And Thorkell just doesn't quite understand. He's like, well, you just came back. But he has that look in his eyes. He's like, no, I'm leaving the town and the JOMSVIKINGs. And then he asks him to forget about him. But Thorkell gets mad because he's like, if he knows, Thorkell knows, he knows the code, right? He knows that if Thors leaves willingly from the JOMSVIKINGs, then he's going to be sentenced to death. And Thors is his friend, his brother, like someone he really respects. And he's like, if you leave, they're going to hunt you down and kill you. And he doesn't want that. And Helga knows too. And I'm surprised that Ylva remained as quiet as she did for as long as she did. But Helga knows as well. She knows what they're risking. And he's asking not to tell. And I love that he has his hand on her shoulder. And Thorkell just doesn't get it. He's like, I don't know why you're leaving. And that's when he says, I've decided not to fight. And he pulls her closer to him and has the hand on her shoulder and like squeezes because he wants to keep her safe and be there with his family. And Thorkell's like, I don't get it. Like, he just doesn't understand. And he says, you're not scared because you almost died, right? He's like trying to figure out, like, why don't you want to fight anymore? What's the reason? He's like, my brother is considering you as his successor. So he's like, my brother's going to make you in charge of everybody. Why would you leave? I don't understand. And he's like, I'm sorry. And he's like, you're just tired, right? He's like, if you eat something and sleep, you know, you'll be in a better headspace. And he's like, now I understand. Because he sees them together. He's like, I understand what a real warrior is. And so Thor tells him, he's like, no, I get it. He knows what a real warrior is. And that's what Thorkell wants to know. He's like, well, what is it, Thors? How do you know? And then we see, and so he looks over and sees the baby. So that we cut straight from a real warrior to the child. And the idea, so there's kind of this idea about a warrior striving, I'm going to put this here, striving to love and protect that love. So, because we cut to his daughter, right, after he says, I figured out what a true warrior is. So it's not fighting for battles or materialistic things. It's not fighting for territories. It's not fighting for selfish reasons, for your own agendas. It's just striving to love someone and protect that love and to hold it sacred, right? Which kind of ties back to the last episode. We were talking about the idea of love versus discrimination. And he's like, I don't want to be a part of it anymore because it's destroying that concept. He's like, I can't stay in here anymore because if I'm going to be a true warrior, this is not the place for me. And that look in his eyes, I love it. That clairvoyance, right? And Thorkell's like, I don't understand it. And he just like destroys part of the pillar there of the house. And he's like, you know the rules. If you leave, then you'll be sentenced to death. If you leave without the leader's permission, then they're going to come after you. And he does know. And he's like, this is the capital of warriors. You don't know how to do anything except fight. Where are you going? And so that's the thing. Thorkell knows, he knows as well that all they know is to fight. Thorkell understands that. He knows his place in the system. He's like, I get it that's all I've done my whole life, but I'm fine with it. I've accepted it. I like it. So he's like, what do you think you're going to do? You don't know anything other than fighting. What are you going to do? And he says, we'll go somewhere, but not here. And Ylva, I like that Ylva's crying face matches Thorkell's like grumpy badger face where he's like, I'm not happy with this at all. And he's like, no. And he goes to swing at them. And I like that. I just imagine this is like such a, like this image of Thorkell swinging an axe towards Helga and Thors and Ylva. It's like a family portrait. like literally is, right? And Thor says, just stand aside. I'll take care of this. A true warrior doesn't need a sword. And he just stands there ready for it. He's like, take care, Thorkell. Oh, I love that shot of Thorkell, though. That shot of him with the axe pulled back where he looks almost cat-like. It's great. And he asks where his sword is. And he says, I don't need it. Yep, a true warrior. I love it. A true warrior doesn't need a sword. And we'll talk about that with Thorfinn here in a minute. But a true warrior doesn't need a sword. And Thorkell's like, I don't understand what you mean. And he goes to hit him, and he takes his hand and breaks through the axe, which is great, and then comes up, and they go to punch him, and he comes up and knows where to hit him. He knows his weakness. He knew his weakness, just like Askeladd figured out, and just like Thorfinn did. Wow. And he said, when I woke up, Thors was already gone. He says, 15 years later, I found out that Thors had really died. So that's curious. So, okay, 15 years later, he found out that Thors died. So that would have been around the time that Thors actually, 15 years later, I found out that Thors had really died. So that was 11 years ago was when he actually died. So 4 years prior. So Ylva is 4 years older than him. So she would be 21. Cracked the code. Did the math. Good deal. So that would have meant that around the time she was born was the last time that he saw her. So Helga, 21 years ago, I mean, if she was 20, she'd be in her 40s. So yeah, I'm going to say Sigvaldi's just older. He is just older. And so while the story's been going on, Askeladd's been tending to Thorfinn's arm and getting it better. He's like, I thought about him for 15 years. I realized that whether the body is still alive or not doesn't matter. What's important for a warrior is where their soul is. What? How philosophical, Thorkell. So Thorkell says that the body is not important. It's the soul. Which is very poetic and very apt for these last episodes that are getting into these like concepts about faith and religion and our body and soul. And he says his soul had gone somewhere far away. Like Vinland, right? So maybe his soul had gone to Vinland. He's like, I don't understand it yet. But it's somewhere I can't reach. So you can look at it, like that way. You could look at it where we're talking about Vinland is where, you know, Avalon was where the warriors go to heal themselves after they've been mortally wounded. There's that concept. But also, there's the idea of, and I won't write it down, I guess, but the idea that we talked about in the last episode of there's something that humanity lost in disobeying God that they can't get back. And so that kind of ties to Thorkell here saying that there's somewhere his soul is gone, but I can't reach it yet. So it's like Thors gets the enlightenment and realizes what's been missing all along, but Thorkell can't realize that yet. He's like, I don't understand what was missing. He's like, I want to get to it someday. It's somewhere, but not here. Which is where he just told Thors, he's like, where are you going to go? And he said, somewhere, but not here, right? So it's just the concept that Thorkell doesn't understand, that Thors was like, get away from all this violence and this cycle. He's like, that's not going to help anybody. And Thorkell just hasn't quite figured that part of it out yet, right? Interesting. He probably became a real warrior there. Which, I don't know. He seemed like he was a real warrior back then. And so he's like, Thorfinn, how did you spend his time in Iceland? And this part was interesting. Because I like that Thorfinn's like, there's a couple ways you can look at it. Either one, it's like, talk about his memory. Because again, he was 6 years old when he lost his dad. It's been 11 years. So it's been literally nearly double the amount of time since he's been alive, since he saw his dad last. So when you're 6 years old, you do remember some things, but my childhood, I don't remember a lot from being 6 years old at all. So, and I've been around my parents all this time since then. So, and even I don't remember them from way back then. So there's a part of me that's thinking that Thorfinn genuinely does not remember what his dad was doing in Iceland. He's been so consumed by revenge and following after Askeladd, he honestly doesn't know anymore. And because he kind of like goes to the side like, I don't want to talk about it, but he really doesn't know. And Thorkell's like, and he says he doesn't want to. And Thorkell's like, well, I just gave you a big chunk of exposition. You're supposed to repay in kind, sir. And Thorfinn's like, no. He's a little brat in this. He's like, I told you what I know. And he's like, I don't care. He's like, you're a cheapskate. It's not that you don't want to tell me. You actually don't know. He calls him out. I can tell by looking in your eyes, you don't have the same mysterious sparkle that he does. So yeah, he's like, you don't have that enlightenment that your father had. And then he says this line, and because Thorfinn's like, what did you just say? He says, you didn't learn anything from Thors, and you're embarrassed that I'd find out. That's the crazy thing, is that he did learn. He did learn from Thors. He's been replaying it over and over again in his mind. He's just actively choosing to not take that knowledge and do anything with it. That's the crazy thing. Thorkell wants to know what that knowledge is, and he just Thor's is dead, so we can't tell him. So he wanted to find out from Thorfinn, but Thorfinn has denied that knowledge to the point where he probably doesn't quite fully remember it anymore. And so it's just kind of lost, right? But Askeladd kind of remembers, and Canute is embodying it. So, and I love that Thorfinn gets mad, like goes up there, and Askeladd's like, no. And he's like, and I love that Thorfinn, he looks at Askeladd, he's like, I'll kill everything starting with you. And Askeladd's like, you're really in no position, you one-armed little boy, to do anything. He's like, you'll lose if you fight like you usually do. And he goes to like stab at Askeladd. Now Askeladd, to be fair, because Thorfinn is acting like a little brat. He's acting like a mongrel. But this is kind of a being of Askeladd's design. So, granted, I'm not saying that Thorfinn's off the hook. But a lot of Thorfinn's behavior has been kind of caused by Askeladd, like neglecting him and not giving him any sorts of advice or resources. He's like, whether you win or lose will decide whether I live or die. That's why I'm going to tell you. So it is all in Askeladd's character, again, a man of principles, that he is going to use Thorfinn. He's going to use Thorfinn to beat Thorkell so he can live. Which is quite selfish, but that kind of goes with Askeladd's character. And I like that again, it's like, Askeladd, you're just going to take family members away from kids. Keep doing it, Askeladd. You've already orphaned the boy. You've already taken the boy's father. Take his great uncle too. Why not? Why not? And he says, how to defeat that monster. And Thorfinn's like, well, why didn't you tell me earlier? He's like, don't bullshit me. He's like, if you knew how to beat him, why didn't you fight him? And Askeladd says, battle isn't the same as shogi, which is a nice little Japanese reference. I'm like, would these Vikings know what shogi is? Probably not, but it's an anime, so we'll let it slide. But he's like, battle isn't the same. He's like, no. He's like, you don't understand. It's not over just because you beat their captain. So Askeladd brings up a really good point to Thorfinn, because Thorfinn's like, well, if you know how to beat him, why didn't you do it? And he's like, well, because then it would just be his men, and they outnumber me, and I'd probably die. He's like, Thorkell has an authority over them, so I need to beat him, but I also don't need to kill him, because he needs to be alive to tell his people to stop. So he's like, back then, it really was not a good situation for me to try to kill him. Would not have ended well. But now y'all have made a deal. So it's on the table. So we might as well take advantage of it, is what he's saying. Which is great. He's like, this is different. If he said you win, he'll let us go. I like that Thorkell's just like getting ready, doing his stretches, getting his arms ready. This beefy man. He values honor, and he'll keep the vow he made before the duel. Yes, that is exactly right. And so I love this. I love that Askeladd, he kind of he reminds me of the trainer in Rocky. I feel like this is like Rocky, and Thorfinn is Rocky, and he's like the trainer, like the old man with the sweatband on, and the sweatpants. Is like, let's do this, Thorfinn. And then the fact that he tells Thorfinn, remember the reason you fight. That's kind of like the biggest insult to Thorfinn. And the craziest thing about this episode, it's to beat me in a duel, right? That's so... I kind of felt bad for Thorfinn in that moment, because it's like, your arm's dislocated, probably broken. You're getting help by the person that you came to kill. And the person that you came to kill that's giving you helpful advice is reminding you that you're there to kill him. What? And his face looks so soft there. Like, I really felt bad for Thorfinn in that moment. Like, damn it, this is just insult to injury. And then I love Thorkell just goes, crick, clicks, and he's like, okay, I'm ready. And he says, let me be your advisor just this once. And I love that shot. The shot of both of them, like the angle of both of them, where they're getting ready to fight, and it like looks like the older and younger versions of one another. It's great. It's great. I just love it. And then both kneeling, getting ready to fight. So, and he says, we have to work together so the two of us can survive this situation. Okay. So then, we're only at the halfway point. So then we have the guys coming up, and they are trying to track down Canute and them. And they say they're going to go see the captain's duel. And And then they stumble upon Canute. And they talk about Thor's. They talk about Thor's, the god. Thor's the god of lightning. And they talk about Freya, which is his wife. And they say that Prince Canute is Freya. She's a goddess. And that's when, lo and behold, the Princess Freya shows up. The reincarnation of Freya. Alongside Atli. And so, meanwhile, we cut back to Thorfinn, who's fighting one-handed with his father's blade and doing his best, trying to get him to go to a certain location. And I like that Askeladd during this entire thing has been slowly like using the snow to clean off his blade and get it as clean as he can so it will reflect sunlight the best. I love that this whole entire match was just Askeladd being like, we can outsmart him. Because that's Askeladd's thing. He's like, we can outplay Thorkell and outsmart him. If we know his weakness, we can do that. And luckily for Askeladd, he knows his weakness, which is just a big broad stroke of luck, right? I hated that when Thorfinn like fell into these guys, they started attacking him. I was like, leave him alone. Like, this isn't a fair fight. If you guys do that, that's not part of the duel. And he says, fight to the end with pride. Are you disgracing the name of Thor's? He's like, your father would be not, well, his father would be displeased with him for another reason. And Askeladd tells him to bear with it. Askeladd's like, he's taking the snow. He's like, get him to come closer. And I was so curious what he was going to do. But we get the shot of the sun, so it should have been obvious. But I was like, what's he going to do with the sword? I'm like, is he going to like fire it at him? Is he going to like try to cut him up from under the snow like what they did to Ragnar? Like, what are they going to do? It's to reflect the sunlight. And they give us that little foreshadowing. They show him like lifting up to the sun. There's a lot of moments in this episode that I feel were the end of manga chapters. Like, I feel like where the flashback ends was a manga chapter. The sword here that the Askeladd holds up reflecting in the sunlight, I feel like that's the end of a chapter. Like, he has a plan. What's the plan? You'll find out in the next chapter. I feel like it was the ending too, right? He says, was it the Battle of Maldon? And he says that it was a fierce battle. Even Thorkell was severely wounded. And I like that we see young hot Askeladd. We see young hot 20s Askeladd. Just so we all know. We're getting the animators are like, you're going to get to see Askeladd in every aspect of his life. And he has the same, like, he has like a little, a kerchief around him. And he's a little bit older. He has like, everybody's trying to grow a mustache to go with their goatee. But he does have the same armor on, right? And he's like, it was only a moment. And he saw him go down. Like, he's weak right there, right? Thorkell the Invincible collapsed. He's like, make him think you've used up all your energy, right? And Thorkell seems like he's disappointed. He's like, I'm disappointed. You seem like you had more spirit. What's the deal? But Askeladd's positioned himself right behind Thorfinn, right where the sun will reflect perfectly. And they're so lucky that, like, the way the sun was positioned, that it worked out. He's like, good job, Thorfinn. You're in a good spot. So yeah, our boy Askeladd, just use our boy, make him a good boy. And then Thorkell gets closer, and that's when he does the sunlight. And I think the guys are like, well, that was over fast. I'm like, this kid had like his arm dislocated. What the hell? What'd you expect? And he's like, he's waiting for him to let his guard down. And that's when he shines it in his eyes. And that's when Thorfinn attacks him. And his weakness is his neck. And he kicks him right there in his jaw. Oh. Now, the thing is, he dropped the axe. He fell down, was knocked out. I thought when Thorfinn jumped on him, he was going to just like make sure he was knocked out. But Thorfinn is literally like a mangy dog. He is literally like a wolf, like the OP suggests. He is a wolf. And him running at Thorkell. I'm like, this dude just told you he was your great uncle, right? Family, we're blood. And Thorfinn's like, oh, we're blood, all right. We're going to spill it. Because he gets all like feral and crazy. And jumps at him. And I love that it immediately cuts to Asker. Asker's like, Captain, like, my boyfriend. And, like, rips his eye out. Like, rips his eye. Oh, my God. Rips his eye out. Thorfinn. Oh, my God. Oh. And I like the Askeladd's like, you idiot, you don't have a weapon. You're just using your hands. I think that Askeladd too was like, you need a weapon to defend yourself against the mountain of men coming at you now. And Asker's just like, kill him. And I like that, well, Asker says kill him, and Askeladd's like, damn it. This kid saved my life, but he couldn't just stop there. And that's where Thorkell's like, you fools, stop it. And like, he looks like Broly from Dragon Ball Z. His hair's all like out and mussed and a big old mess. He looks like Broly. It's great. He's like, don't you dare humiliate me. He's like, this duel wasn't over. Oh, how dare you tarnish it. I'm like, that kid just took out your eye. And Asker's like, I love the Asker, like, as he gets down. Thorkell is so huge. He has to, like, get down onto Asker's level. He has to, like, crouch over. And Asker's like, I'm sorry, but he hurt my bae, so my honor as a warrior's off the table. He's like, I don't care if you hate me for it. I'm going to kill that kid. And he's like, no. And his hands are so huge, they could grab, like, over him, over Asker's head and neck. And he's like, if you want to kill me, then kill me. And Thorkell's like, it's like, it's a good thing I like you. And so that is a good note too, that Asker says, I'm going to put Asker up here. He points out that I don't care if I die, and we're going to tie this back to Askeladd. Asker's like, Thorkell is the only one to unite 500 beasts. Maybe, maybe not. But Asker has the same reasoning and loyalty towards Thorkell that Askeladd ends up having for Canute. So it's kind of curious that, right? It's interesting how that all ends up working out. But anyway, Canute shows up. Canute shows up. It is great. He's like, you just shouldn't fight anymore. And Askeladd's like, you're here. Where's Bjorn and the others? It's just Alti, though, right now. Oh, because Willibald's treating Bjorn's wounds. And he's like, whoever dies in this fight will die in vain. He's like, you're all just wasting your time. The enemy's not here. It's my dad. But we're going to get to that. And Alti's like, Alti realizes that Thorkell killed all of his men, his fellow comrades, surprising no one. I am kind of glad the one guy's alive, though. Old Torgrim. I'm glad he made it. I'm glad that it took his brother to get him to spring back to life. That was kind of sweet. Saying like, who are you? You're here. I kind of like that. That was great. Although he says, who are you? And Alti's like, oh God. You're like, he's so freaked out. He's got amnesia. And then it's interesting. Canute, based on what we saw in the past, Canute's kind of like the same height as Thor's, which is curious. And he says, how can you kill each other without end? Don't you tire of it? He's like, don't you get tired of just fighting for no reason? And Thorkell's like, I don't care if you're royalty. You're not spoiling my duel either. He's like, I treat everyone. Thorkell is an equal opportunist. He's like, everybody's going to get treated the same no matter what. You don't get to stop my duel any more than anybody else. And Canute's just like, I'm kind of done with that. And he says, stay back, little girl. And Canute's like, yeah, I've been called that a lot. Sticks and stones, man. And he says it doesn't look like a duel anymore. As we cut to Thorfinn, and Thorfinn's just like collapsed. I want to get a picture of that because it's kind of amazing. Thorfinn is just like, he looks like a kicked puppy. It's great. But he's like, if you're a leader, you should show your men pride and honor. So Canute, he says that a leader shows his men pride and honor. He's like, you should treat them with pride and honor if you care about them. This is kind of ridiculous. What's going on here? And Thorkell kind of gets offended at that. He's like, who are you to judge me, sir? And I love he just sits there and grabs his head and screams. Oh my God. He's so confused. He's like, I don't understand what's happening. He's like, what is this? Where did you come from? He's like, silence. I don't need you to tell me what I already know. Thorkell's not dumb. He's kind of simple, but he's not dumb. And he's like, I know to treat my men with pride and honor. Why are you telling me these things? It's almost cute how mad he gets in that moment. And everybody else is like, that one guy's like, oh God. Like, oh geez. And he's just so loud. Like another guy in the back's covering his ears. It's wonderful. But, and then he's done. And then he's done. Because Canute's just waiting on him to be over it. And then Thorkell like screams his lungs out and he's like, okay, I'm good. It's absolutely wonderful, right? He's like, and he just goes, just fumes it out. He's like, let Thorfinn go. I lost the duel. And everybody's like, but you should have known that he was going to be, he's like, you should have known he was going to be honorable to what he promised. And they start to object and he tells him to shut up. He's like, I lost. I should preserve my dignity. And Asgeir, I love Asgeir's like face like, it's a good thing I like you. He's just like, Asgeir's just like, are you serious? Your dignity can't take a 5-minute break so we can kill this little mongrel kid? He's like, nope, do as the captain commands. And then I like that Thorfinn immediately like gets himself up out of the snow. He's like, whoop, thanks. Oh my gosh. And he's like, that was unpleasant. I've been alive for 50 years, but I've never had a day as bad as today. He's like, I had to fight my great nephew. I lost my great nephew. My great nephew didn't want to talk back with me, didn't want to communicate. I got told up by a princess. Today's just been a bad day for Thorkell. And so I like that he randomly just had this block. This block's just out in the middle of the snow. He's like, battle's over. It's my battle over block. And he asks for like, this guy comes walking up with the foxskin pelts. And he's just like, booze. This is Thorkell's like post-victory or post-loss, regimen. Now Thorfinn at this point is like, okay, we did what we needed to do. We beat Thorkell. We can get out of here. Let's go. And he goes to Askeladd, but Askeladd is like, are you joking? I want to see how this plays out. And he has Thorfinn's blade in his hand, right? And it's hilarious. It's hilarious that Thorfinn is trying to grab Askeladd to go. Because this whole battle, this whole duel and everything was so that Thorfinn could get Askeladd back to kill him. So I'm like, Thorfinn, it's the most outrageous thing seeing Thorfinn tug on the sleeve of the man that he wants to kill, but currently is unable to. So he's asking him to leave with him. Under any normal circumstance, you'd be like, why would Askeladd ever say yes to that? But in all honesty, I think if Canute hadn't been there, he would have gone with him. Would have been totally fine with it. And then he says, if you want to go, I'm staying. And Thorfinn's like, what do you think I went through all that for? Thorfinn gets no breaks. No breaks whatsoever. I love the animation on him. But Askeladd says, shut up and watch. Askeladd has periodically in the last, few years tried to give Thorfinn some advice. And back at the little Stonehenge place, he was kind of had the same tone that he does now, where he's like, shut up, pay attention, watch what happens with Canute, and you might learn something. Thorfinn's a mangy dog, so he probably won't, but I like that Thorkell just guzzles down the barrel. Like, I like that there's that contrast between Willibald, who like cradles the barrel and has been like sipping on it all this time, and Thorkell just like empties it in one go and shills it away. And he says, who do you think you are, Prince? You just strolled up and broke up this fight. And Canute's like, yes, that was me. He's like, I want to have your sled and your supplies. And Thorfinn and Askeladd are my followers. I'm taking them. And Thorkell's like, are you stupid? Like, what kind of hunter would let his prey get away? He's like, why do you think I'd let you leave? And then Canute says, you intend to use me to bargain with King Swin. He's like, is that what you're thinking? And Thorkell's like, yeah, duh. He's like, you're bait, you're hostage, you're a source of money. Why would I let you go? And so, again, I was shipping Thorfinn and Canute together. And in the last couple episodes, a lot of you were like, well, should we really ship Canute and Thorfinn together? Because he did abandon Canute to go after Askeladd. And I was like, well, he was just worried about Askeladd. It's fine. I'm sure that was like a one-time thing. But here, Thorfinn is like, let's leave him. Forget about him. I'm like, like down. The ship is slowly sinking into the oblivion. My BL ship is sinking, y'all. I have to look to Asgeir and Thorkell now because my Canute and Thorfinn ship is sinking drastically. So if you see an uptick in Asgeir and Thorkell talk, it's because my other BL ship is on the rocks. And he's like, don't get greedy. And Askeladd's like, I'm not getting greedy. Shut up and watch, kid. Like, we're about to witness something. And I love how, like, shocked Thorfinn is. I love how shocked he is when he says, just shut up and watch. I want to get a shot of that. It's great. It's great. It's a great shot. But yeah, so this guy comes up to Canute, and he's like, stay back, you lout. I won't run away. I love that Canute calls him a lout. It's great, using his princely speak. And that gets Thorkell's attention, that he's not going to run away. Because he's like, oh? He's like, because Thorkell hates cowards. So he's like, you're not a coward. Interesting. Okay. He's like, fine, then you matured a lot in a short time. What happened? And Canute's like, I mourned my dad and my father figure, and I woke up from a dream. That's pretty much what happened. And Canute doesn't exactly answer that question. But Thorkell kind of baits him a little. He says he found Ragnar's corpse in the village. And Canute's like, I love that Canute kind of takes that moment to like reflect and be like, it's in the past. It's not going to get to me. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about that in a minute when Askeladd confesses. But he's like, Thorkell, I have no value as a hostage. So that's the thing too, is that Thorkell, he knows Thorkell is going to take him as a hostage to bargain with him. But he says, I have no value as a hostage. He's like, you don't understand. This whole battle that you're doing is to get me is pointless. It's especially pointless because it will get you nowhere. My father doesn't care about me. He's like, the reason being, that shot there is so good. The shot of him, it could almost be the thumbnail. That shot's perfect. The shot of Canute. My father doesn't love me. Now, you could take that one of two ways. You could take that as his literal biological father does not love him, which is what he kind of goes with later as this conversation goes on. But you could also say that he's like, my father in heaven doesn't love me because he's not giving me salvation. You could take it either way. You could take it either way. But then he kind of follows up with it. And Askeladd's like, interesting. He says, my father's going to give the throne to my brother Harold. He's like, I'm just second to my brother. And Thorkell's like, he's like, I know how that feels. Like, Thorkell seems to relate. He's like, yeah, because he was Sigvaldi's brother. He's like, I know how that feels. My brother kind of took the throne too. So he's like, but I didn't really want it, so whatevs. But he seems like he understands what he's talking about. The vassals that caused the vassals to start fighting and endangered the foundation of the kingdom. So yeah, he's like, my dad wanted to make my brother successor, but there's too much dissension amongst the kingdom. So he decided instead, my existence is the source of distress to the king. I love that it shows him chopping. You have the big thing of grapes, like the representation of the big, beautiful, like bunch of grapes hanging. And what's been cut and pruned off is the little stem. But the thing of it is, the little stem has just as many grapes, but they're not as developed yet. They're not grown out. They haven't bloomed, right? He just chops it off because it seems like it's disfigured and smaller. It's a great visual metaphor there. I love it, of Harold versus Canute. I like it a lot. I want to go back just a hair and get a shot of that. That's a really good shot there. So yeah, he's like, my father basically just wanted to send me out into battle, have me die on the battlefield, and then we just sweep it under the rug, and that would be it. He's like, it would allow my father to avoid killing his own child. He's like, my dad wouldn't have to feel guilty because I would have died on my own, and then he would just be like, well, too bad, so sad, and put Harold on the throne. And so then Thorkell's like, if I did let you go now, what would you do? Where would you go? Like, he's just sitting there, like, mulling it over, like, so if I do let you go, what are you going to do? And so, like he's curious. He wants to hear what he's going to say. He says, I'm going to go to the main camp in Gainsborough. And I'm going to fight my father, the king. So, yeah. So, Canute's like, well, I'm either going to get killed or I'm going to die on the battlefield. He's like, YOLO, what else am I going to do? So he's going to fight the king. The crazy thing is, Canute could beat the king. The king's in terrible health. He's not doing good at all. He's like on death's door. If Canute strolled up to his father and fought him in a sword fight, I think absolutely he could kill him. It's the fact that he has so many troops that is the problem. Because if he goes to kill the king, he's basically usurping the throne. He's basically taking the throne for himself. Like, where's Harold in all of this? Is Harold there in Gainsborough? Is he going to have to fight his brother too? Or is Harold like off in another kingdom far away and Canute's just going to swoop in and take the throne out from under him? Seems like it. But he's like, I'm going to fight my father, the king. And the thing about it is that it may even be, you could look at it, is that Canute's going to assert his role as the king. In the last episode, he said that's how a king should act. So it makes me think he wants to go and take the throne. But you could kind of argue it even two ways. You could say he's either going to try to go kill Swin and take the throne, or he's going to kill Swin and then talk things out with his brother. Maybe Canute doesn't want to be the king, but he talked about it last episode, so I kind of think that he does. But Askeladd at this point is staring at him like, what we doing? And so I like that Thorkell says, oh, you think you can win? Congratulations. He's like, that's a pipe dream, but good on you. Glad you're so confident. It's like, they've got a lot of troops. He's like, I'm doing what should be done. My life isn't valuable anyway. And that gets Thorkell to immediately stand up. Because he's like, no. He's like, hold on. Whoa. He's like, anytime somebody says that, I got to test them. Because Canute says that his life is not valuable. He's like, I'm a dead man walking, so I might as well make the most of it now while I have the chance. But Thorkell's like, you say that your life isn't valuable. I love how he stalks towards him. And he just stands above him like this mountain of a man with his eye gouged out. He says, I've seen lots of men who said they didn't care about their lives. And they all cared once he like tried to kill him. He's like, most of them cried and begged for their life as soon as they get hit, even if it was a light punch. And he goes to punch him. He's like, you're just like them, aren't you? And Askeladd's like, oh shit. Askeladd's like, up until now, Canute's not been too good at dodging punches. He looks a little worried, but Canute goes to attack him and nothing happens. I love the flare of the hair coming out, like his perfect glossy hair. It's so good. And everybody's just shocked. Even Thorfinn and Askeladd. He doesn't move. That's a good shot of Canute too. Yeah, the animation team, they did a pretty good job on Canute. And I love that. He's like, I hate that look in his eyes. I've seen it before. When Thorkell gets serious, he's a lot of fun. I like Thorkell's character when he gets serious. He's like, I hate that look in his eyes. And when he said, I've seen it before, I was like, because it was from Thor's. Yes. And he looks down at him and sees that same look. He says, what are you looking at with those eyes? It's like, he's like, you got the 1,000-yard stare. He's like, what are you seeing that I can't see? Like, I love it. And then we cut back to Canute. And he's like, what happened? They got quiet. And I love he's like, his eyes narrow and he's like, men. He's like, I can't fight him. He's like, even I have one thing I regret. And he says, the thing I regret is I regret not following Thor's. It's like, I regret not going with my brother. So he wanted to follow Thor's. And that's exactly what Askeladd asked him to be the leader of his men. Askeladd is like, you've got this aura about you that makes people want to follow you. That's what Canute has. It's that same aura, that same presence, right? I love that he said that was his regret. He wanted to go with him. If I had followed him then, I would have learned the secret to being a real warrior. I don't know if Thorkell would have liked the answer to what it means to be a real warrior or not, because he seems pretty diehard on battle. May not have liked to know what that secret was. But I love that when we cut down, I didn't notice this in the reaction, but he's like, when I wanted to learn the secret of being a true warrior, you see his hand, and it's the hand missing the 2 fingers. Because he fought in battle. And so then he's like, well, I'm going to go into... He's like, I'm going to end up fighting King Swin anyway. He was like, my goal was to give him to the English. He's like, so we're going to fight King Swin either way. So honestly, he's like, I've got nothing to lose. Thorkell's like, I have nothing to lose in this case, so why not? Let's see what happens. And he's like, it's decided. I've made my decision. And he says, I'll help you fight. And everyone is shocked. Asgeir's like, how did we get here? Asgeir's like, why did we have this turn of events? This is the most bizarre thing in the world. I'm going to follow you. And Askeladd's like, oh my God. I'm going to watch what you do from now on and who you'll become. So yeah, Thorkell's going to do the same thing with Canute that Askeladd wants to do. The same thing. He's like, I'm going to watch you and see what happens. It's the wildest thing. But if you do anything soft, I'm going to kill you. He's like, so if you don't prove yourself as a warrior, I'm going to kill you. So don't be getting soft on me. And I love Canute's like narrowing of his eyes, that smile. Where he's like, good. From today on, you too are one of my followers. And Thorfinn is like, did I miss something? Like, we were just eating rabbit stew and you were being a princess 10 seconds ago and now you're smirking and being this manly man? What happened? Like, Thorfinn is baffled. And Askeladd, he's like, and what about us? And he says, well, the captain says we're going to follow him. And Askeladd, he just got handed the biggest piece of chocolate cake in the world. Like, him laughing at it all. Like, this is it. He's like, my mother's dream. What I saw in him is coming true. He's like, I can't believe it. He's like, he really did awaken. He's like, killing Ragnar did it. And Thorkell's like, what's wrong with him? What's he still doing here? Like, leave. But here's the thing. He laughs, like realizing his mother's dream and everything he's worked for is all going to come to fruition. And then when he raises his head, he gets serious again. So he has his laugh. He has his moment. He has have his cake and eat it too. And then he's like, okay, down to business. He's like, let's do this. Deadly serious, Askeladd. I love it. And that's when he like drags himself over to Canute. And he pledges his loyalty. But here's the thing. He bends down on one knee. And the first words out of his mouth is that he says that I'm the one who killed Ragnar. He admits it. And the look on Canute's face contorts ever so slightly. When I say ever so slightly, it's pretty noticeable. But his face contorting, he's like, excuse me? And he says, however. And I love that he's positioning the sword that he's like, if you want to kill me now. Like, he's positioned the sword where it's like at his neck. And he's like, okay, Canute, I killed Ragnar. If you want to kill me, let's do it. Just get it over with. However, if you let me live, then I will help you, even if it costs me my life. That's exactly what his mother wanted. His mother said, when you find the king, you'll be his staff and you'll serve him no matter what. And now he's found his king. And I like that Canute is just like, I'm mad that you killed Ragnar. And he turns from him. But he says, then work on his behalf too. That's how you shall mourn his death. And Askeladd's like, okay. He's like, certainly. He's like, fine, you killed Ragnar, then you're going to serve him through death. And you're going to do everything you can to protect me and help me. That's how you'll mourn it. Oh, and that look. But it softens. It softens. I really like that. I like that Canute, for a split second, Canute is mad. And he seems like he wants to take revenge. But then he lets it go. He's like, no. He's like, if I focus on something petty, like revenge, nothing's going to get accomplished. So Canute, he, in that moment, lets go of the revenge. He lets go of the revenge. Which is not something that Thorfinn can do. Again, right before we started the reaction, I was like, I can see why people get frustrated that Canute has had this spiritual awakening and enlightenment, but I think that the mangaka means it in some ways to be a direct opposition to Thorfinn. You have Thorfinn who cannot escape his vengeance and the quest for vengeance, and you have Canute that gives it up in a breath and just lets it go. It's great. It's good times. And so then he's like, if you want to come with me, then come with me. Let's do this. He's like, we're going to drag King Swin down from the throne. We're going to have a coup, baby. We're just going to go do a coup. No big deal. Canute's coup. It's Canute's coup. I love it. That's what we're going to call it now. Canute's coup. I'm a big fan of alliteration. I'm all about it. And I like to Askeladd's like, what are you doing? Don't copy me. He's like, I'm the one pledging loyalty. And Askeladd's like, it was my idea first. I've like had this planned out for decades. Thorkell's like, anyway, let's be friends. It's like every time Thorkell finds somebody that's a remotely good fighter that he considers a warrior, he's like, let's become BFFs right now. Please and thank you. And Thorfinn's like, I'd just rather be anywhere else. And he's like, I killed most of your men, but it's water under the bridge, right? And Thorfinn, like a dog, like a little mangy puppy that's been beaten, just walks right back over to them. Doesn't say a word. But then Thorkell says this line, it's water under the bridge. He's like, I killed your men. He's like, I killed your men, but it's water under the bridge, right? He's like, hey, even though I did that, we're all good, right? Isn't that the case? And Askeladd says, he smiles that Cheshire grin. And he says, letting it be water under the bridge is the only thing you can do. He says that is the only way. You've just got to move forward. You've got to move on. Again, Thorkell, Askeladd, and Canute, they all moved on from that revenge and from getting back at each other. But Thorfinn is still trapped within it. So, interesting. It's the only thing. And as they go, you can see Thorkell and then you can see Askeladd. And Askeladd is the one following Canute the closest. And it relates kind of back to that OP, right? And Canute's far ahead from everyone else. It's great. It's great. This episode was great. I loved this episode so much. It was absolutely wonderful. So yeah, that was a great time. I'm curious now. So we got a new game plan. 6 episodes. 6 episodes left, right? We got 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Okay, so we have 5 episodes left. 5 episodes to get to Gainsborough and try to dethrone a king. If we even get that far. With 5 episodes left, I feel like we're going to get to Gainsborough, but I feel like we're going to leave season 2 like at a junction, right? We're going to leave season 2 right before something goes down. Or maybe not. Maybe we'll have a battle. I don't know. It seems like doing an epic battle, like dethroning the King of Denmark in 5 episodes. It seems like a tall order, but with this series, I don't know. So I don't want to be spoiled. I don't want to know where we're headed, but all I do know is that we're going to stop King Svend. That's the plan, at least. If we get to that point or not this season, I don't know, but I am curious to know your thoughts down below and what y'all thought of this. I hope y'all enjoyed this reaction and discussion, but I'm pretty excited. Great Uncle Thorkell's here. He's trying to become besties with Askeladd. Thorfinn's arm's out of commission. He's like got his tail between his legs coming back. Hopefully Bjorn and Willibald are fine. And Canute's starting a coup. Why not? So I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe. Take care. And yeah, I'll be back next week with episode 20 of Vinland Saga. Bye.